My husband bought me a charming little apartment 3 weeks after his mother's funeral. He did not present it like a surprise. Adrian Whitmore was too controlled for that. He simply drove me across town on a gray Thursday afternoon, parked beneath a glass building I had passed many times without noticing, and handed me a silver key. "This is yours," he said. I looked at the key, then at him. "Mine?" "For a while," he said gently. "Not forever, just long enough for you to breathe." The apartment was on the 18th floor, small, bright, quiet, cream walls, pale floors, a narrow balcony facing the river. It looked like the kind of place where nothing painful had ever been said aloud. Adrian opened the windows first. "I know the old house has been too much," he said. "Every corner reminds you of Mom." Mom. He still said it that way, as if Eleanor had belonged to both of us equally. And maybe, by the end, she had. Eleanor Whitmore had been my mother-in-law for 16 years. In the beginning, she was elegant, sharp, and difficult to please. For years, I thought she merely tolerated me. Then she got sick. Illness stripped the house of performance. People stopped pretending they had time. Some visited when convenient, some sent flowers. Adrian, her only son, loved her in the way busy sons sometimes love their mothers sincerely, but from a distance he kept calling necessary. I stayed. Not because I was noble. Because one night I saw Eleanor trying to lift a glass of water with trembling hands, and the proud woman who once corrected my table settings suddenly looked like someone's frightened child. After that, I could not leave her alone in the dark. I sat beside her bed, warmed her hands, learned her small comforts, and listened to the memories Adrian was too tired to hear. So when she died, the old house did not feel empty to me. It felt full. Full of her breath, her silence, her perfume in the hallway, her reading glasses on the bedside table, her rosemary plant by the back door. Ugh. Adrian said that was exactly why I needed to leave it for a while. "The house is holding you there," he told me, walking through the apartment like a man offering mercy. "You don't have to keep being strong in every room." I wanted to believe him. Grief makes kindness look larger than it is. He had already arranged almost everything. The bed was made. The pantry had tea and soup. A few of my clothes hung in the closet. My reading lamp sat beside the bed. Even Eleanor's framed photograph had been placed on the nightstand. That was what made me cry. Not the apartment, not the river view, not the key. The photograph. It was my favorite picture of Eleanor, sitting near the garden window, wrapped in a pale shawl, looking away from the camera with the smallest smile. I had taken it on a morning when she had more strength than usual. Adrian had not been home. "You brought this?" I asked. I thought it might help. I should have wondered why he had packed my things before asking if I wanted to stay. I should have wondered why the apartment felt prepared, not offered. But pain is exhausting. And when someone offers you rest, sometimes you do not inspect the hand offering it. "What about the house?" I asked. Adrian touched my shoulder. "The house isn't going anywhere, Clara. Let me carry that part for a while." It sounded like love. Later, I would understand it was permission he had written for himself. Adrian was a commercial real estate developer. His work had always kept strange hours, investor dinners, late closings, private walkthroughs, emergency calls from partners who only seemed to remember him after dark. In the first years of our marriage, I waited for him with tea going cold in the kitchen. By the 10th year, I had stopped asking when he would be home. He called them impossible hours. I called them marriage. So, when he told me he would still come by after his late meetings, I did not hear a warning. I heard routine. That first night, he kissed my forehead at the apartment door. "I may be late. Don't wait up." I almost smiled. I never do anymore. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not sadness, something smaller, relief, maybe. He left just after 9. The apartment became silent in a way the old house never was. At the old house, silence had texture pipes settling, trees brushing windows, Eleanor's clock ticking in her room. Here, silence felt smooth and expensive. I unpacked 2 drawers and left the rest of my suitcase open. At midnight, Adrian texted, "Late meeting. Sleep if you can." At 2:39 a.m., I woke to the sound of his key in the lock. He slipped inside carefully, as if not wanting to disturb me. I kept my eyes closed. He stood in the bedroom doorway for several seconds before coming in. "Long night," he whispered, though he thought I was asleep. Then he lay down beside me, smelling faintly of cold air and something floral I could not name. The second night was the same. He left after dinner, texted near midnight, returned after 2. Nothing about it seemed impossible. That was the problem. Adrian had spent years teaching me that after 2 in the morning was simply when his work ended. I never imagined it was when his real life began. For those first 2 days, I tried to believe the apartment was peace. I placed Eleanor's photograph on the nightstand. I made tea in the little white kitchen. I told myself the quiet was healing, not exile. But somewhere inside me, beneath grief and gratitude, a small question had begun to breathe. If this apartment was a gift, why did it feel so much like being moved out of the way? On the 3rd morning, a bouquet arrived. The front desk called just after 10. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's a delivery for you." For one foolish second, I thought it was from Adrian. I imagined roses, an apology, a card written in the smooth, careful language he used when he wanted to be forgiven before I had decided to be hurt. But when I came downstairs, the bouquet waiting at the desk was not romantic. It was beautiful, but not in a husband's way. White lilies, rosemary, tiny blue flowers tucked between green stems, no red roses, no satin ribbon. It looked like something chosen by a person who knew memory mattered more than beauty. The receptionist smiled politely. "Lovely flowers." I thanked her and lifted the card. The handwriting was neat and old-fashioned. "For Clara Whitmore, Eleanor always said you stayed when everyone else left. M.V." The lobby blurred. I read it twice. At the funeral, people praised my strength. But this card did something different. It remembered that I had stayed. I stood there with the flowers in my arms, unable to move. "Mrs. Whitmore?" the receptionist asked. I blinked. "Yes. Sorry." I looked at the initials again. M.V. I did not know anyone named M.V., or if I did, grief had hidden the name from me. I carried the bouquet toward the elevator. The doors opened just as I arrived. I stepped inside and pressed 18. Before the doors closed, an older woman entered beside me. She was neatly dressed in a gray coat, with a small leather purse held in both hands. Her silver hair was pinned back. She did not look curious. She looked like someone who had learned the value of keeping her face still. She pressed 23. The elevator began to rise. I lowered the flowers slightly. One rosemary stem brushed my wrist. The woman's eyes moved to the bouquet, then to the card, then to my wedding ring. She did not stare. That made it worse. "Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked. I turned toward her. "Yes." For the smallest second, something changed in her expression. Not shock, not pity, recognition, perhaps, though I had never seen her before. "Do we know each other?" I asked. "No," she said. Her voice was calm, controlled. The elevator numbers climbed. 12, 13, 14. I waited for her to say more. She did not. At 18, just before the doors opened, she leaned slightly closer and said, very quietly, "Don't fall asleep before 2. The doors opened. I stared at her. "I'm sorry?" But she had already stepped back, her face composed again, as if she had only commented on the weather. I stepped out because the doors began to close. The last thing I saw was her standing perfectly still inside, riding upward to the 23rd floor. For several seconds, I remained in the hallway with the flowers shaking in my arms. "Don't fall asleep before 2." It was absurd. It was intrusive. It was exactly the kind of thing I should have dismissed. But the sentence entered me and stayed there. Inside the apartment, I placed the bouquet on the kitchen counter. The rosemary made the room smell faintly like Eleanor's garden. I set the card beside her photograph and stared at the initials. M.V. I tried to call Adrian, but he did not answer. A few minutes later, he texted, "In meeting. Everything okay?" I typed, "Do you know anyone on the 23rd floor?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Why? Not no, not, who lives there, why? I stared at the word until it seemed to change shape. Nothing, I wrote back. Just met a neighbor. His reply came quickly. Be careful. Some people in buildings love drama. I almost smiled at that. Adrian had always been good at warning me about other people's intentions. That night, I made tea and did not drink it. At 11, I turned off the kitchen light. At midnight, I got into bed and lay still beside Eleanor's photograph. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. At 1:47 a.m., my phone lit up. Adrian, late closing. Don't wait up. Any other night, I would have put the phone face down and surrendered to the familiar loneliness of being married to a man who always had one more meeting, one more client, one more door to walk through before he came home. But the woman in the elevator had said, "Don't fall asleep before 2." So I got out of bed. I turned off every light in the apartment. Then I sat on the floor near the front door, where I could see the hallway through the narrow glass panel at the end of the corridor. If I leaned slightly, I could see the elevator doors and the digital numbers above them. I felt ridiculous. A 39-year-old woman sitting in the dark because a stranger had whispered a sentence in an elevator. At 2:11, nothing had happened. At 2:14, I almost went back to bed. At 2:18, the elevator numbers lit up. My hand tightened around the doorframe. The numbers were not rising from the lobby, they were coming down. 23, 22, 21, 20, 19, 18. The elevator stopped. The doors opened, and my husband stepped out. Not from the lobby, not from the parking garage, from above me. Adrian adjusted his coat, glanced once down the empty hallway, then walked toward my apartment with the careful ease of a man who had done this before. A few seconds later, his key turned in the lock. I was still sitting in the dark when he stepped inside. He stopped. "Clara?" I rose slowly. "Still awake?" he asked, almost smiling. I couldn't sleep. He came toward me and kissed my forehead. His lips were cool. His coat carried the night air, and beneath it, faintly, something floral. "You should have slept," he murmured. "The closing ran late." I looked at him. His phone was already in his hand, face down. "I know," I said. He studied me for a second, perhaps trying to decide how much I knew. Then he smiled again. "Come to bed." I did. I let the lie take off its shoes. I let it hang its coat by the door. I let it lie down beside me and breathe evenly in the dark. But I did not sleep. Because my husband had spent years teaching me not to wait up. And that night, for the first time, I understood why. The next morning, I did not ask Adrian where he had been. That was the first thing I learned from grief. Sometimes the truth runs away faster when you chase it. So I made coffee. I stood in the little white kitchen and watched him button his shirt as if nothing had shifted in the night. He looked rested, not relaxed, exactly. Adrian was rarely relaxed, but there was a smoothness to him that morning, the kind he wore when he believed he had controlled the room. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked. "A little." "You should rest today." He said it gently, but I heard the shape beneath it. "Stay here. Don't go looking. Don't ask why the elevator brought me down from 23. I poured coffee into 2 cups. My hands were steadier than I expected. "Your closing last night," I said. "Was it in this building?" For half a second, his fingers paused on his cuff. Only half a second. Then he laughed softly. "In this building?" "You came from upstairs." His eyes moved to mine. Not sharply. Adrian was too practiced for sharpness. He gave me concern instead. You were watching the elevator? I was awake. He took the coffee from me, buying time with a sip. One of the investors has a unit here, he said. I stopped by after the closing. You know how small the commercial property circle is. It was a good answer. Too good. That was the thing about Adrian. He never threw lies. He placed them carefully, like furniture in a staged home, everything angled to make you feel foolish for noticing the empty rooms. What floor? I asked. He smiled again, but this time it reached nowhere near his eyes. Clara. Just my name. A soft warning disguised as tenderness. You've been through a lot, he said. I don't want this apartment to become another place where your mind keeps working against you. My mind. Not his movement from the 23rd floor. Not his message about a late closing. Not the woman in the elevator. My mind. I nodded because I had no intention of having that fight before breakfast. After he left, I stood by the door for several minutes, listening to the hallway settle back into silence. Then I went downstairs. Vivian Hartley was near the mailboxes, slipping an envelope into her purse. She looked exactly as she had in the elevator. Composed, quiet, impossible to read. I walked toward her before I could lose my courage. Mrs. Hartley? She turned. I knew her name because I had asked the receptionist earlier, casually, as if I were trying to learn the building. You told me not to sleep before 2, I said. She did not deny it. You knew he would come down, I added. Her face did not change, but her eyes softened in a way that made me feel worse, not better. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she closed her mailbox and held the key between 2 fingers. Some truths are not mine to tell, she said, but they are yours to see. The sentence was so dignified, so careful, that I almost hated her for it. I wanted someone to say plainly, yes, your husband is lying, yes, you are not imagining this. Instead, Vivian gave me a door and refused to push me through it. Is it the 23rd floor? I asked. She looked toward the elevator. I live across from 2306. That was all. No accusation, no gossip, no dramatic whisper, just a number. Then she nodded once, as if the conversation had ended properly, and walked away. I stood there with the mailboxes behind me, feeling as though someone had handed me a match in a dark room. Apartment 2306. I did not go there, not then. Instead, I began to notice what I had been trained not to notice. Adrian knew the building too well for a man who had supposedly bought the apartment as a sudden gift. He knew the faster elevator, the quieter garage entrance, and the hours when the lobby thinned out. When I asked, he shrugged. Real estate, Clara. I notice buildings for a living. Another good answer. That afternoon, I went down to the lobby to pick up a package delivered under my name. As I waited by the desk, the elevator opened. A woman stepped out. She was younger than I expected. Mid-30s, maybe. Dark blonde hair pulled into a low knot. Camel coat. No dramatic perfume cloud. No smile that said she had won something. Good morning, Miss Monroe, the receptionist said. The woman nodded politely. Celeste Monroe. The name landed inside me before I was ready for it. At the same moment, the receptionist turned toward me. Mrs. Whitmore, here's your package. Celeste stopped, not fully, just enough. Her eyes flicked to me, then to my wedding ring, then away. The color left her face so quickly that, for one terrible second, I felt less like a betrayed wife, and more like a ghost who had walked into someone else's story. She knew my name, or she knew enough of it. I wanted to hate her immediately. It would have been easier if she had looked cruel, easier if she had smiled like a woman who had won. But Celeste Monroe looked like someone who had been told a sad story for so long that she had mistaken it for the truth. That did not make her innocent, but it made Adrian more dangerous. I took my package upstairs and locked the door behind me. The flowers from M.V. were still on the counter, the rosemary scent sharper now. I picked up the card and read it again. For Clara Whitmore, Eleanor always said you stayed when everyone else left. M.V. Until that moment, I had been looking upward, toward 23, toward Celeste, toward the secret above me. But Eleanor's name on that card pulled me backward, toward the old house, toward the room Adrian wanted me to leave. I opened the small notebook Eleanor used to keep beside her bed. I had taken it from the old house before the funeral, thinking it was only full of medication times and grocery notes. Most pages were ordinary: tea, blue blanket, call Margaret. Tell Clara. Ah, my breath caught. I turned back. Margaret Vale. Below the name, in Eleanor's thin handwriting, were 6 words: if Clara ever needs the truth. By then, I knew my husband had a secret above me. What I did not know yet was that his mother had left one behind me. Whew! I called the number beside Margaret Vale's name 3 times. No answer. On the 4th try, I left a message. My name is Clara Whitmore, I said, and even saying my own name made my voice shake. I received flowers from someone who signed the card MV. If that was you, please call me. It's about Eleanor. Then I sat on the edge of the bed in the apartment Adrian had bought for me and stared at Eleanor's photograph. Her eyes in that picture were turned away from the camera, toward something outside the frame. I used to think she looked peaceful. Now she looked like she knew something I had not yet reached. By noon, Adrian texted, "How are you feeling today?" It should have warmed me. Once, it would have. I typed, "I may go by the house later. Need a few things." His reply came almost immediately. "Maybe not today. You're finally resting." There it was again. Resting. Such a harmless word, such a useful cage. I wrote, "I won't be long." This time, he did not answer. I drove to the old house just after 3. Eleanor's rosemary plant sat by the back steps, still stubbornly green. The porch light Adrian always forgot to turn off was burning in the middle of the afternoon. I entered the front code. Nothing. I tried again. The lock flashed red. For a moment, I simply stood there, keyless in front of the house where I had folded sheets, cooked soup, held Eleanor's hand, and slept in chairs more often than beds. Then my phone buzzed. "Adrian, security update. I was going to tell you." I stared at the message. Of course he was. Adrian was always going to tell me things after they had already become facts. I walked around to the back door. Eleanor had once shown me the old brass key hidden beneath the rosemary pot. "Never trust a house with only one way in," she had said. At the time, I thought she meant storms, broken locks, practical things. Now, kneeling beside that plant, lifting the pot with dirt under my fingernails, I wondered how long she had known the danger was not weather. The key was still there. Inside, the house smelled like dust, lemon polish, and Eleanor's absence. No workers, no repairmen, no sign of a security update except the one meant to keep me out. I went straight to Eleanor's room. The door was half open. That was wrong. I always closed it. Inside, the room had not been destroyed. Adrian was too controlled for destruction, but it had been disturbed in a way only someone who knew the room could recognize. The blue blanket was folded on the wrong side of the chair. The medicine tray was empty. The books on the nightstand had been stacked alphabetically, which Eleanor would have hated. Her sewing tin was open. The drawer where she kept old letters had been pushed in too quickly, leaving a corner of paper caught at the edge. My heart began to pound. He had been searching, not cleaning, not organizing, searching. I touched the bedpost, then the lamp, then the little dish where she used to place her rings before sleep. My mind moved through memory instead of logic. Adrian would search like a businessman. Drawers, safes, documents, locked boxes. But Eleanor had never trusted obvious hiding places. She said obvious places were for people who expected thieves to be stupid. I turned toward the chair beside her bed. The old wingback chair was faded at the arms, its floral fabric worn smooth where my elbows had rested night after night. That chair knew the shape of my exhaustion. It knew the weight of my body, during the hours when Eleanor slept, and I was too afraid to leave. Once, near the end, Eleanor had placed her trembling hand on the armrest and whispered, "This old chair knows who stayed." I had thought she was being sentimental. Now I crossed the room and knelt beside it. The underside of the cushion had been sewn shut with threads slightly darker than the fabric, not obvious, not careless, but new enough that I could see where the pattern broke. My fingers touched the seam. Then I heard a car in the driveway. Ah! I froze. The engine stopped. A door slammed. Adrian. For one wild second, I considered tearing the seam open, shoving whatever was inside beneath my sweater, running out the back like a criminal. But I was not the one who had broken into this house. So I stood. Adrian entered Eleanor's room less than a minute later. He stopped when he saw me beside the chair. The expression on his face passed through three versions of him: surprise, irritation, concern. Concern 1. "Clara," he said softly, "what are you doing here?" I looked at the room around us. "I could ask you the same thing." His eyes went to the chair. Only once, but I saw it. "I told you not to come today." "No," I said. "You suggested." He exhaled as if I were making this difficult. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" He moved toward the nightstand and began straightening books that did not need straightening. "From this, from standing in her room and reopening everything." I watched his hands. "What are you looking for?" He did not answer fast enough. Then he turned, wounded now. "My mother's things." "Then why did you change the coat on your wife?" The room went very still. For a moment I saw something hard behind his face, something tired of pretending. Then it disappeared. "You are not yourself right now," he said. There it was, the beginning of the story he would tell about me. "You're exhausted, you're grieving, you're turning ordinary things into accusations." I almost laughed. Ordinary things. A changed lock, a searched room, a husband stepping out of an elevator from above at 2:18 inches the morning. "I want to stay here tonight," I said. His face tightened. "No." "Just that, too quick." Then he softened it. "I mean, not tonight. Come back to the apartment, sleep, we'll talk in the morning." He reached for my hand. I let him take it because I was not ready to fight him in Eleanor's room. But as he led me out, I looked back once, at the chair, at the seam, at the one place Adrian had not yet understood. And for the first time since he handed me the silver key to the apartment, I knew exactly where I needed to return. Margaret Vale called me back at 8:12 that evening. I was sitting alone in the apartment, still wearing the same clothes I had worn to the old house. Adrian had left an hour earlier after making sure I drank tea, took a shower, and promised not to drive anywhere again that night. He had said it with such tenderness that, for one moment, I almost hated myself for suspecting him. That was the worst part about men like Adrian: they hurt you, then handed you a blanket. The phone rang beside the flowers. The lilies had begun to open, filling the room with a clean, almost funeral scent. "Clara Whitmore?" a woman asked. "Yes." "This is Margaret Vale." I stood so quickly the chair scraped the floor. "You sent the flowers." "I did." Her voice was older than I expected, firm but careful. How did you know where I was? Eleanor told me that if Adrian moved you out of the house shortly after her passing, I should find you. Ugh. The words moved through me like cold water. If Adrian moved me out? She was afraid he would. I looked toward Eleanor's photograph across the room. She knew? She knew enough. My hand tightened around the phone. Mrs. Vale, what did Eleanor leave for me? Margaret paused. I would rather not discuss all of it over the phone. But I can tell you this. Eleanor wanted the house to protect the person who protected her. I closed my eyes. For weeks, I had been told grief made me fragile, suspicious, too attached to a house full of painful memories. But Eleanor had seen the house differently, not as a tomb, as shelter. Where is it? I asked. She said you would know where she rested easiest. The old chair. I saw it instantly, the faded flowers, the worn arms, the seam under the cushion. Eleanor's thin fingers tapping the fabric as she whispered, "This old chair knows who stayed." Did Adrian know? He knew Eleanor had made arrangements, Margaret said. He did not know where she placed her personal letter. At least, she hoped he did not. What if he finds it first? Then he will try to tell you it does not matter. The answer was so direct that I almost smiled. Margaret's voice softened. Clara. Eleanor was not confused. She was ill, yes. She was tired. But she knew exactly who had been present in that house. Do not let anyone turn her gratitude into your shame. I could not speak for several seconds. Because shame was exactly what Adrian had been building around me. A quiet shame. A reasonable shame. The kind that made me wonder if wanting to be remembered made me greedy. If you've ever stayed for someone when it was hard and no one saw the full weight of it, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. I'd love to know I'm not alone in believing quiet love still matters. After I hung up, I did not sleep. At 1:30 a.m., Adrian texted, "Investor dinner running late, don't wait up." This time I did not sit by the door. This time I put on my coat. I waited until 2:20, until I heard the elevator descend from above and stop on 18. I heard Adrian's key in the lock. I lay still in bed and let him believe I was asleep. He stood there for a moment, as he always did. Then he showered, came to bed, and turned his back to me. By morning, I had memorized the rhythm of his breathing. At 9:15 he left for what he called a meeting. At 9:22 I left for the old house. This time I did not use the front door. I went around back, lifted the rosemary pot, and took Eleanor's key from the soil with steady hands. The house was silent when I entered, not empty, waiting. I went straight to Eleanor's room and locked the door behind me. The chair stood beside the bed exactly where I had left it. A square of morning light fell across one arm, bright enough to show the worn places where my fingers had gripped it during the hardest nights. I knelt and turned the cushion over. The seam was small, careful, almost invisible, unless you knew to look for tenderness instead of treasure. I found sewing scissors in Eleanor's tin. One cut, then another. The thread loosened. Inside the cushion was a flat envelope wrapped in pale blue fabric. Eleanor's handwriting was on the front. For Clara. N. Not Mrs. Whitmore. Not my son's wife, Clara. I pressed the envelope to my chest before I could open it. For several seconds, I was not thinking about Adrian, or Celeste, or the apartment, or the elevator. I was thinking of Eleanor's hand in mine the last week she could still speak clearly. "You were not what I expected," she had whispered. I had laughed softly and said, "I know." She had squeezed my fingers with what little strength she had left. "No," she said. "You were better." I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, a folded legal document, a small silver key, and a flash drive. I read the letter first. My dear Clara, if you are reading this, then my son has done what I feared he might do. He has tried to move you away from the place where you gave more than anyone had the right to ask of you. This house did not become a home because of the Whitmore name. It became a home because someone stayed when staying was hard. Blood made Adrian my son, but love showed me who my family truly was. The words blurred. Shh. Eleanor had not disinherited Adrian. She had not written him out like a punishment. She had left him what was his. But she had also left me protection. The right to remain in the old house, a private account in my name, a condition that the house could not be sold, refinanced, or emptied without my written agreement for a set period of time. Enough time, she wrote, for me to decide my life without being pushed out by someone else's urgency. At the bottom of the letter was one final line. Do not let Adrian make you feel like a guest in the life you helped hold together. My phone buzzed. Adrian, where are you? Another message followed. Clara, answer me. Then another. I'm at the apartment. You're not here. Outside, a car turned into the driveway. I folded the letter with shaking hands. For the first time, I was not afraid because I knew nothing. I was afraid because now I knew enough. Adrian entered through the front door. I heard the lock click. Then his footsteps crossed the foyer, quick and controlled. He did not call my name. That frightened me more than shouting would have. It meant he already knew where I was. The bedroom door opened. He stood there in his dark overcoat, face calm enough to fool anyone who had not been married to him for 16 years. Then his eyes dropped to the envelope in my hand. For 1 second, the mask disappeared. Give me that, he said. Not softly, not lovingly, just the command beneath every gentle thing he had said since he handed me the apartment key. I stood beside Eleanor's chair. No. His jaw tightened. Clara. There it was again. My name is a warning. What did you think she left? I asked. Money? A house you could sell? Something you could bury before I saw it? He stepped into the room. My mother was sick. She knew exactly what she was doing. You don't know that. I have her letter. His eyes moved to the envelope. She was confused at the end, he said. You know she was. It was the ugliest thing he had said so far. Not because it insulted me, because it reached into the grave and tried to make Eleanor small enough to ignore. She was clear enough to know you would do this, I said. He laughed once, quietly. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then explained the changed code. Security. The searched room. Cleaning. The apartment. Kindness. The elevator from 23. That one landed. I watched it. His silence was brief, but it was real. Then his face softened. Oh, Clara. I hated that tone. The pity. The patient sadness. The voice of a man preparing to turn truth into evidence of my instability. You followed me? I watched an elevator. You are grieving, he said. You are connecting things that have nothing to do with each other because you can't let go of my mother. My mother? I repeated. He flinched, maybe because he heard it too. Eleanor had become more mine in her final days than his in his convenient visits. He looked around the room, searching for another angle. You need help, he said gently. And there it was, the story he would tell. Not that he lied, not that he moved me out, not that he came down from another woman's floor after 2 a.m. That I needed help. I held the envelope tighter. You don't get to call me unstable because I found what you were looking for. His face hardened. You think this makes you safe? The question was quiet enough to be mistaken for concern. It was not concern. Before I could answer, his phone lit up in his hand. He turned it over too quickly, but I saw the name. Celeste. A strange calm came over me. Answer it, I said. He slipped the phone into his pocket. Don't do this. I'm not doing anything. I'm standing in the room where your mother protected me. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he stepped aside from the doorway. Come back to the apartment, he said. We'll talk there. No. If you stay here tonight, I will call Margaret and tell her you're not well enough to handle this. You mean you'll start the story before I can tell the truth? He did not deny it. That was the first honest thing he gave me all day. I left the house with Eleanor's envelope under my coat and the flash drive in my pocket. Adrian followed me in his car, not closely enough to look threatening, but close enough to remind me he was still there. Back at the apartment, he became gentle again. He made tea, he spoke softly, he said we were both exhausted. He said his mother's death had opened wounds in both of us. He said I had always been sensitive. Sensitive, that word had covered so many bruises over the years. At midnight, he left. Work? I asked. He paused by the door. Yes. A late call with the West Coast group. Of course. At 1:56 a.m., I stood in the dark hallway outside my apartment with my phone in my hand. I did not want to go upstairs. I wanted to be wrong. At 2:09, the elevator passed 18 and continued up. I took the stairs, slowly, quietly, not all the way, just to the landing below 23, where the fire door had a narrow gap and sound traveled better than it should. At first, I heard nothing. Then a woman's voice, Celeste. This still feels wrong, Adrian. She's downstairs. Her voice was not triumphant, it trembled. Adrian answered in the same careful tone he used with me. Only until she's steady enough to hear the truth. You said your marriage was over. It is. Then why does it still feel like hiding? A pause. Then Adrian said, grief makes people cling to ruins. I pressed my hand over my mouth. Celeste spoke again, quieter. Then why move her here? Another silence. When he answered, his voice was lower. Because I need her out of that house. The words entered me cleanly. No decoration, no excuse, no room left for doubt. I pressed record with my thumb, too late for the first part, but not too late for what followed. Celeste said, what is in that house? Adrian replied, something my mother should never have left behind. I stepped back from the fire door. My knees felt weak, but I did not fall. Because at last every piece had found its place. The apartment, the late nights, the changed code, the searched room, the woman upstairs, and Eleanor's chair. He had not only betrayed me with another woman. He had built a life above me, moved me beneath it, and called it healing? I did not sleep after that. I returned to the apartment before Adrian came down, locked the door behind me, and stood in the dark with Eleanor's envelope pressed against my ribs beneath my coat. At 2:48, his key turned. This time I was in bed. This time I pretended. He came in quietly, showered, and slipped under the covers beside me. His breathing slowed within minutes, steady and clean, as if lying required no effort from him at all. I stared at the wall until dawn. By morning, I knew one thing clearly. I could not win by arguing with Adrian alone. He had built separate rooms for every lie. In one room he was the grieving son, in another, the exhausted husband, in another, the man trapped in a dead marriage. In another I was fragile. In another Celeste was patient. In another Eleanor had been confused. I needed every room to open at once. I called Margaret first. She listened without interrupting while I told her about the apartment, the elevator, Celeste, and the recording from the stairwell. When I finished, she said only, "Then let him explain all of it in the same room." It was such a simple sentence that I almost cried. I had spent weeks being moved from place to place, out of the old house, into the apartment, away from Eleanor's room, away from questions, away from my own instincts. Now I would choose the room. The old house. Eleanor's house. The house that had remembered me when my husband tried to erase me from it. I sent Adrian a message just after lunch. "We need to talk tonight, at the house. I'm ready to be reasonable." He replied within 2 minutes. "Good, I'll come at 7. Reasonable. That was one of Adrian's favorite words for women who had stopped resisting. Next, I texted Vivian Hartley. I did not ask her to expose anyone. I did not ask for drama. I wrote only, "I may need you to confirm what you personally saw, nothing more." Her reply came an hour later. "I will come, briefly." That was Vivian, even her kindness had boundaries. Celeste was harder. I stared at her number for nearly 20 minutes. I had found it in Adrian's phone months earlier under the name C.M. Consulting. At the time, I had believed it was work. My first message was too angry. I deleted it. My second was too polite. I deleted that too. Finally I wrote, "If he told you I was too fragile to hear the truth, ask him why he needed me out of my house before he could tell it." I sent the recording with it. Then I turned off my phone. At 6:40, Margaret arrived at the old house wearing a navy coat and carrying a leather folder. She was smaller than I expected, with silver hair cut sharply at her chin and eyes that made me understand why Eleanor had trusted her. She did not hug me. Instead, she took my hand in both of hers and said, "She loved you very much." That was worse than a hug. At 6:55, Vivian arrived. She stood in the foyer as if already preparing to leave. "I will not stay long," she said. "I know." She nodded toward Eleanor's room. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Not for all this, not for your husband, just the clean, dignified sentence." At 7:03, Adrian walked in. He saw Margaret first, then Vivian, then me. His face did not change enough for anyone else to notice, but I saw the calculation begin. "What is this?" he asked. "A conversation," I said, "in one room this time." His eyes moved to Margaret's folder. "Clara, whatever you think you're doing." The doorbell rang. Adrian turned. I opened the door. Celeste stood on the porch. She looked pale, almost ill, not victorious, not glamorous. Not like the woman who steals husbands in stories because she enjoys the damage. She looked like someone who had finally seen the cost of a lie she had wanted to believe. Adrian's voice dropped. "Celeste, you shouldn't be here." She looked at him, not me. "That's what you said about the truth, too." For the first time, Adrian had no immediate answer. We gathered in the living room. Eleanor's chair sat beside the window, the cushions sewn loosely back together. I had left it there on purpose. On the coffee table, I placed 3 things: the card from the flowers, Eleanor's letter. My phone, with the recording ready. Adrian looked at the objects as if they were weapons. They were not, they were witnesses. You told me the apartment was kindness, I said. You told Celeste our marriage had been over for years. You told everyone grief had made me unstable. But every version needed the same thing. I looked at him. Me out of this house. He gave a small, humorless laugh. You've rehearsed this. No, I said. You did, I'm just repeating your plot. He turned to Celeste. She's twisting this. I told you she was struggling. Celeste's face changed then. Something in her broke, but it did not make her weak. It made her clear. You told me she was too fragile to hear the truth, she said. But you weren't waiting because she was fragile. You were waiting because you were searching. Adrian's jaw tightened. You don't understand my family. No, Celeste said. I understand what you gave me. A version of her pain that made me feel less cruel. The room went silent. Then she looked at me. I knew he had a wife, she said. I won't pretend I didn't. But he told me there was nothing left between you. He told me your marriage had been cold for years. I believed him, because it was easier than asking whether a lonely story was still a lie. I did not forgive her in that moment. Forgiveness would have been too neat. But I believed she was telling the truth. I pressed play. Adrian's voice filled the room, because I need her out of that house. Then, clearer, something my mother should never have left behind. Adrian stood very still. Margaret opened Eleanor's letter and read the final paragraph aloud. If my son ever tries to make Clara feel like a guest in the life she helped hold together, let this house answer for me. Let it say what I may no longer be here to say. She stayed. She gave care when it was inconvenient. She loved without being promised reward. And she is not to be removed like furniture after my death. For once, Adrian did not speak first. Vivian did. Quietly. I live across from 2306, she said. I saw him leave after midnight more than once. No embellishment, no judgment, just the truth, standing upright. Adrian looked around the room and finally understood the one thing he had failed to control. We were no longer separated by his stories. We were all hearing the same one. Adrian did not fall apart. Men like Adrian rarely do, they adjust. First, he tried dignity. He said private pain should not be performed in front of strangers. Margaret reminded him that secrets were not the same as privacy. Then he tried grief. He said losing Eleanor had made him act badly. I reminded him he had changed the door code before I found her letter. Then he tried pity. That was the hardest. He looked at me the way he used to look at me in the early years, when I still believed sadness made him honest. Clara, he said, you know I loved my mother. Yes, I said. And she loved you enough to see what you had become. The sentence wounded him. I did not enjoy it. I had imagined truth would feel like revenge when it finally left my mouth. Instead, it felt heavy. Necessary, clean, but heavy. Oh, Celeste left first. At the door she stopped near me. I'm sorry, she said. I did not answer immediately. She swallowed. I know that doesn't fix anything. I knew he was married. That part is mine. But I won't help him make you disappear. Then she walked out. I watched her go without hating her as much as I wanted to. Maybe because hating her would have been simpler than understanding how carefully Adrian had placed both of us where he needed us. Vivian left next. She paused only long enough to say, "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Whitmore." No advice, no performance, just dignity. Margaret stayed. She sat with me at Eleanor's kitchen table while Adrian paced in the living room, making calls he lowered his voice to take. She explained what Eleanor had done in clear, simple terms, never letting the conversation become cold paperwork. Eleanor had not disinherited her son, she had protected me. The house could not be sold or refinanced without my written consent for the period Eleanor had specified. A private account had been left in my name. Not a fortune large enough to make me greedy in anyone's story, but enough to make me free in my own. Most importantly, Eleanor had written a statement in her own hand. "Clara is not a guest in this house." I read that sentence until the words stopped shaking. Later that night, after Margaret left and Adrian finally ran out of angles, he stood near the front door with his coat over one arm. "The apartment is still yours," he said. I almost laughed. He still thought in properties. Units, assets, transfers, spaces to assign people to. "No," I said. His eyes narrowed. "You're being emotional." "I'm being accurate." I took the silver key from my purse, the one he had placed in my palm 3 weeks after his mother's funeral, and set it on the entry table. "You gave me a place to rest because you thought grief had made me easy to move." He said nothing. "But grief didn't make me weak, Adrian. It made me listen." His face tightened, but he did not answer. There was nothing left for him to arrange. When he walked out, the house did not feel empty. It felt like it exhaled. For the first time in weeks, I slept in the old house. Not in Eleanor's room, not beside her bed. I slept on the sofa in the living room, wrapped in the blue blanket she used to keep over her knees. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The rosemary plant by the back door bent in the wind and stood back up. In the morning, I opened every curtain. I washed the teacup beside Eleanor's bed. I folded her shawl and placed it in the cedar chest. I moved the old chair from her bedroom into the reading room, where sunlight came through the east-facing window. It did not belong beside a sickbed anymore. It belonged where someone could sit and live. The bouquet from Margaret had begun to fade, but I kept the rosemary. I tied it with string and hung it near the kitchen window. For weeks, Adrian had told me the house was drowning me. He was wrong. The house had been holding its breath, waiting for me to come back. A few days later, Celeste sent a letter. "I'm sorry for believing the version of your marriage that benefited me. I should have asked harder questions. I know that doesn't undo what I did, but I won't help him make you disappear." I read it once, then I placed it in a drawer. Not because I forgave her completely, because I no longer needed her to be the villain in order to understand who had written the lie. In the months that followed, I returned slowly to restoration work: old rooms, worn chairs, pieces people thought were too damaged to save. It felt right. I no longer needed broken things to pretend they had never been broken. Sometimes I sat in the old chair in the reading room with tea in my hands and thought about that night in the apartment. The flowers, the elevator, Vivian's quiet voice. "Don't fall asleep before 2. At the time, I thought she was warning me about my husband's secret. She was, but not only that. She was warning me about the life I had been sleeping through. The one where I accepted late nights because questions became arguments. The one where I mistook being moved aside for being cared for. The one where I let a man call my grief weakness, because he was afraid of what my love had earned. My husband bought me a new apartment because he thought he could move me out of the truth. But his mother had hidden it in the one place he never understood. Not in a safe, not in a drawer, not behind a locked door. She hid it where love had been sitting all along. In the old chair beside her bed. The chair that remembered who stayed. And the night a neighbor told me not to fall asleep before 2, she did not just wake me up to my husband's secret. She woke me up to my own life. If this story touched something in you, leave one word in the comments: awake. And tell me where you're listening from. I'd love to know where this story found you. Because sometimes the truth does not arrive loudly. Sometimes it waits until you finally stop sleeping through the life someone else built for you.